The twin moons of Iridan hung low in the amber sky as Kael Rourke tightened the final bolt on his station's water condenser. A gust of dry wind scraped across the canyon floor, carrying with it the familiar tang of rust, ash, and ozone. Out here on the fringe, 30 clicks past the last Terran relay beacon, the land was death, and Kael had chosen it willingly. He wiped his brow with the back of his glove, sweat already soaking the inner lining of his jumpsuit. The silence pressed in, broken only by the wheeze of the condenser unit and the occasional metallic creak from his prefab shelter. A lifetime ago, Kael might have found the desolation unnerving. But after 13 years in the Terran armored infantry, most of them spent burning cities on contract planets, he welcomed the emptiness. There was peace in it. And peace was the one thing he hadn't had since his final deployment on Dras Vox. Inside the station, a single-room bunker with reinforced walls and military-grade systems stripped down to bare function, Kael moved through his ritual, checked the solar array, scanned for movement, cook a ration, reread an old book for the 10th time. He didn't mind routine. Routine meant survival. That night, as the horizon bled crimson and the stars winked into being, a noise shattered his solitude. A knock. No, not a knock. A scratching. Kael froze mid-step, ration bar half unwrapped in his hand. He hadn't heard another living thing out here in months. The desert of Iridan wasn't just desolate, it was lethal. Scorch storms, sand striders, and the arid air itself made sure of that. The scratching came again. Lighter this time. Weak. Hesitant. He moved to the console, activated the external feed. A creature stood there, barely tall enough to reach his hip. Thin, orange-furred, with oversized ears and a narrow, elegant snout. It swayed on its feet. Its ribs showed beneath the fur, and its eyes, golden, slit-pupilled, expressive, were locked on the door. It looked up into the camera and whimpered. Kael narrowed his eyes. "The hell are you?" He hovered his finger over the lockdown toggle. This could be a trap. Or bait. But instinct, the same gut feeling that once kept him alive in orbital hellfire, now whispered something else. It was starving. And it was alone. Kael muttered a curse and hit the door release. The outer door hissed open, letting in a wave of dust-laden heat. Kael stepped back, pulse pistol low but ready, as the creature stepped cautiously inside. Its movements were hesitant but graceful, like a creature used to stealth, not desperation. But today, hunger had won. Up close, Kael could see it more clearly. Humanoid, yes, but not human. The orange fur along its limbs and neck shimmered faintly in the station's lighting. Its fingers ended in small claws, and its narrow feet were digitigrade, designed for speed, for bounding across rough terrain. A juvenile, he guessed. Maybe 8 or 9 human years in height, though its species might age differently. It sniffed the air and made a soft whimpering noise. Kael holstered his weapon and gestured toward the table. "I'm guessing you're here for food. Sit tight." It didn't understand the words, but it understood the tone. It sat, knees drawn up, tail curled tight, and watched him silently, golden eyes tracking every move. Kael cracked open a ration pack, sliced some of his rare-grown veggies into thin strips, and laid it all out on a plate. Then he pushed it toward the creature, placing it on the floor so it didn't have to climb onto any furniture. The furred cub crept forward, sniffed, then began to eat, delicate but ravenous. Something twisted in Kael's chest. Pity? No. Something older. Older than war, older than survival. Something close to protection. The little one finished eating and gave a low, rhythmic chirp. Gratitude? Kael wasn't sure. But before he could respond, the cub was up and scampering to the door, paws scrabbling at the exit panel. "Hey, slow down." He crouched beside it. "You just got here." The creature paused. Looked up. Made another trill, this one almost urgent. Kael sighed, then keyed the door. "You're lucky I'm an idiot," he muttered. The cub dashed into the cooling dusk. He stood in the doorway a long time, arms folded, watching the fading heat shimmer off the rock horizon. What had he just invited into his life? And why did he already miss it? Then, just as he turned to head back inside, another noise. The same scratching. Kael blinked. Again? He keyed the door. This time, the cub wasn't alone. Standing behind it, poised and silent as shadow, was an adult. And she was breathtaking. She stepped forward on silent feet, towering over the child by more than half a meter. Her fur was a richer, deeper orange than the cub's, striped with darker hues that curled like living flames across her limbs and sides. Her body was athletic, powerful in the way Kael recognized from years of combat, lean muscle, subtle tension in her gait, a readiness in every step. And yet, grace. An elegance that held his breath in his chest. She wore what looked like an armored bodysuit, tight to her form, fashioned of matte gray and black materials unfamiliar to Kael. Utility pouches strapped to her thighs. A bladed weapon on her back. Her face, partially shadowed by the dusk, came into full view when she stepped past her cub. High cheekbones. A narrow, intelligent snout. Slit eyes that glowed faintly amber in the dark. She spoke. The language was melodic, layered with subtle vibrato and glottal shifts that Kael couldn't parse. But her tone was warm. Curious. Protective. She gestured to the child, then pressed a clawed hand to her chest. Kael raised his hands slowly, voice calm. I don't know what you're saying, but I think I get it. She tilted her head, ears flicking. Kael pointed to the cub. He came here. Starving. I fed him. That's all. She studied him. Then her hand touched her chest again. Her voice, this time, was slower. Sera. I am Sera. Kael tapped his chest. Kael. Kael Rourke. Her lips curled slightly. A smile? Kael, she repeated, as if savoring the shape of it. Her gaze lingered on him. On his bare arms, his sweat-slick skin. Kael suddenly remembered he was shirtless. He cleared his throat and tried not to look flustered. The cub chirped and pressed against Sera's leg. She knelt, ruffled his head gently, then looked up again. Her voice shifted, quieter now. Thank you. Feed son. Kael's eyes softened. He yours. She nodded. My blood. My child. Kit. Kit, Kael repeated. The cub, Kit, perked up, recognizing his name. He chirped again and nuzzled Kael's leg. I think he likes me. Sera stepped closer. Her hand reached out, paused inches from Kael's bicep. Then, slowly, she placed her palm against his arm. Warm. Soft fur. And beneath it, tension. Not fear. Not aggression. Something else. Respect. She made a low thrumming sound that vibrated through her chest. It took Kael a second to recognize it. She was purring. Kael stood perfectly still. He'd been shot, burned, even crushed under debris during orbital drops. But nothing had ever disarmed him like the sound of that purr. It wasn't just a vibration. It was intentional. Felt. It echoed up through her hand and into his body like a low, calming thunder. His pulse quickened, and he wasn't sure whether it was fight or flight, or something far more primal. He cleared his throat. I have a translator. Might help. Sera tilted her head, curious. Kael turned, opened a nearby locker, and pulled out an old field translator unit. Terran military issue. Bulky, outdated, but functional. He powered it on, aimed its receiver toward her, and gestured. Speak into it. Slowly. She watched the device warily, then said something in her melodic tongue. The translator sputtered, glitched, then crackled to life. Gratitude. For kindness shown to my blood. You fed him. You are owed honor. Kael blinked. Owed? Sera placed her hand over her heart again. In my clan, a debt of survival binds families. Life for life. Yours is protected. Protected? He echoed, raising a brow. I think I'm the one who protected him. The translator glitched, then rendered Sera's soft laugh. And now, I protect you. Kael chuckled dryly. That's a first. Kit tugged at Sera's leg, chirping. She looked down, nodded, and said something that the translator rendered as, "He wishes to say farewell. For now. We must return before the Darkstalkers roam." Kael's brows lifted. "Darkstalkers? Beasts," Sera said simply. "Night is not safe for cubs." She moved toward the door, Kit following. But just before she stepped into the twilight, she paused. Turned. Her eyes met his, and for a second, something ancient passed between them. Sorrow. Trust. The recognition of another survivor. "Kael Rourke," she said carefully, in accented Terran. "You have made a bond." Then, without warning, she stepped close and brushed her cheek softly against his neck. It wasn't a kiss. But it wasn't not one either. It was intimate, ceremonial. He could still feel the warmth of her fur as she and Kit vanished into the night. Kael stood in the doorway long after they were gone, hand on his throat, heart rattling against his ribs. What just happened? And why did it feel like the desert had just changed? Kael didn't sleep that night. He sat at his terminal, reviewing perimeter cams on loop, as if hoping to catch another glimpse of orange fur or glowing eyes in the darkness. But the desert remained still, the only movement coming from heat currents and the occasional flicker of a sand wraith far out past the cliffs. He finally drifted into a light, unsatisfying sleep sometime after the second moon reached zenith. When he woke, the first sun was already crawling across the horizon, burning gold into the canyon. The station's internal systems were quiet. Normal. He made coffee. Or at least, what passed for it, bitter, recycled stimulant sludge he pretended tasted like home. He was halfway through a maintenance sweep when the alarm blared. Kael froze. Motion detected. Sector 3. Perimeter breach. He lunged toward the console, pulled up the camera feed, and his gut twisted into a knot. Kit. Alone. The cub stumbled into view, covered in dust, panting heavily. His eyes were wide with panic. He sprinted straight toward the outer door, collapsed against it, and began scratching frantically. Kael didn't hesitate. He bolted to the airlock and slammed the manual release. The moment the door opened, Kit fell forward, chittering, clawing at Kael's pant leg. His fur was matted with sweat. His body trembled. "Whoa, whoa! Easy, buddy. What's wrong?" Kit looked up, ears flat, mouth working, but no words came. "Translator," Kael muttered, rushing to grab the unit. He clicked it on, held it close. "Speak," he urged. "What happened?" The cub chirked, hissed, gestured wildly. The translator stuttered. "Mother, taken, cages, hunters." Kael felt ice crawl down his spine. "Hunters?" Kit nodded rapidly, miming grabbing motions. He pointed toward the east, across the desert. "Where?" The translator barely kept up. "Far Ridge. 2 suns ago. Big ship." Kael's expression darkened. He knew that ridge. He'd scouted it when he first built the station, rocky, secluded. Easy to land a ship undetected. "Do you know who took her?" Kit snarled, a low, vibrating hiss. The translator clicked. "Scale skins. Slave takers. For pleasure dens." Kael swore under his breath. Saurians? He'd heard of them, reptilian slavers, known for trafficking rare species. Banned in civilized systems, but out here? No law. Just cruelty. He turned toward his locker, yanked it open, and pulled out his old combat vest. His pulse rifle gleamed in the dim light. "You sure about this?" he asked, more to himself than the cub. Kit didn't answer. He didn't have to. Kael looked into those golden eyes and saw nothing but raw, desperate hope. "All right," he muttered. "Let's bring her home." The desert wind howled against the side of the old speeder as Kael fired up its solar core drive. The machine hadn't moved in months, but the hum it gave off was familiar, comforting, even. He ran diagnostics on the system while securing Kit in the passenger seat, tightening a harness designed for a combat drone around the small Vulpine's narrow shoulders. "Hold tight," Kael said, checking the weapon crate behind them. This isn't a pleasure cruise. Kit clutched the edge of the seat, golden eyes wide but steady. No fear now. Just fierce, burning purpose. Kael looked at him sideways. You ever been in a fight, kid? The translator kicked in. Father taught me. Not soldier. But I know systems. Ship engines. Comms. Shields. Kael raised a brow. You an engineer? Kit's tail flicked. I learn fast. Kael smirked despite himself. I'm starting to see that. He throttled up the engine, and the speeder launched forward, slicing through heat shimmer and bone-dry wind. The desert blurred into ridges and cliffs, the sky a molten sheet above them. As the machine roared across the terrain, Kael's thoughts spiraled. He wasn't a rescuer. Not anymore. That part of him, the part that led squads into burning cities and dragged wounded comrades through blood-soaked rubble, was supposed to be buried. But war had never really left him. And now it came back, wearing a familiar shape. Not orders. Not medals. But something far simpler. A child. A mother. And a choice. He glanced at Kit, who clung to the console, whispering quiet directions. Past the rock fong. Then left. Big shadows. The kid had made this journey alone once. Barefoot. Across a desert that could kill a grown man in hours. And now they were going back together. Kael tightened his grip on the steering yoke. The wind carried distant thunder. Not from a storm. From engines. They were close. They reached the ridge by late afternoon. The sun baked the rocks in a haze of gold and copper, but Kael guided the speeder behind a jagged overhang that blocked view from above. He killed the engine, letting silence settle over them like a heavy shroud. Kit crouched beside him, tail curled tight, pointing toward a narrow crevice between two rocks. There. Look! Kael pulled a scope from his vest and adjusted the lens. His breath caught. Below, nestled in a shallow canyon, sat a sleek black ship, saurian in design, cold and cruel like its owners. Razorback fins curved over its hull like the bones of a predator. Outside, half a dozen reptilian figures patrolled the perimeter, armored in obsidian-scaled battle suits, weapons slung casually over their shoulders. And beside the landing ramp, cages. Kael focused in. His gut twisted. In the furthest cell, slumped but alive, was Sera. Even through the scope, her orange fur was unmistakable. Her limbs were bound. Her body limp. But her eyes burned. She was still fighting. Kael exhaled slowly. She's alive! Kit's claws dug into the sand beside him. They hurt her. Kael gritted his teeth. Not for much longer. He studied the layout. There were 6 confirmed targets, all well armed. The terrain was rocky, but open. The cage zone was exposed. No chance of getting her out quietly. Not without help. He turned to Kit. You said you know ships? Kit nodded once, ears pricked. Can you get in there and disable comms and engines? Yes, the translator said. Father showed me. I remember. Kael hesitated. You'll be inside. Alone. If they catch you. Kit raised his head. They won't. I am small. I am fast. Kael stared at him a long moment. This wasn't a child anymore. Not today. He crouched and put a hand on Kit's shoulder. All right. You'll go in under the hull. There's usually a maintenance hatch. Sabotage comms first. Then engines. I'll go for Sera once you give me a distraction. You have 20 minutes. Kit blinked. What if I'm faster? Kael smiled. Then I owe you 2 rescues. Kit gave a soft chitter and darted into the shadows, vanishing beneath the rocks like a ghost. Kael turned back to the canyon. He unholstered his pulse rifle, checked the mag, and felt the old rhythm return. This wasn't survival anymore. This was war. Kael moved into position, hugging the edge of the ridge as the sun dipped low. Shadows stretched long across the canyon, painting the landscape in molten reds and purples. From here, he had a direct line of sight to the cages, 20 meters at most, but no cover. Any approach would need timing, distraction, precision. The ship sat quiet and deadly at the center of it all. Its sleek hull pulsed faintly with power, engine coils glowing from recent use. The Saurian guards paced lazily, confident in their superiority. Why wouldn't they be? This was a routine pickup. Another rare specimen added to their inventory. Kael's fingers tensed around the rifle's grip. He hated men like them. Not because they were strong, but because they preyed on the weak. Predators with ships and credits and no soul. A soft vibration buzzed in his earpiece, the signal from the field translator. Kit had linked in. A moment later, the ship flickered. Its running lights went dark. Then the engines whined, high-pitched, sputtering, and fell silent. Inside the cockpit, warning klaxons blared. Lights flashed red. Kael smiled. "Good work, kid." Chaos erupted. The guards barked orders in their hissing tongue, two of them bolting up the loading ramp to investigate. The others fanned out, distracted, scanning the area with rifles raised. Kael moved. Swift. Silent. Deadly. He dropped into the canyon like a shadow, crossing the open ground in seconds. A crate near the cages provided just enough cover. He slid behind it, heart thudding, breath controlled. Sera's cage was 10 feet away. She was awake now, blinking groggily, her ears twitching as her head turned toward the sound of footsteps. Kael stepped into view. She froze. Recognition bloomed in her golden eyes. "Kael!" The translator whispered her voice through his earpiece, low and slurred. "Quiet," he whispered. "I've got you." He pulled a bypass tool from his vest and started on the cage lock. The mechanism was primitive, shock latch and mag bolt. Military grade, but nothing he hadn't cracked before. Sera leaned weakly against the bars. "Knew you would come." The lock clicked. Kael eased the door open and caught her as she collapsed forward into his arms. Her fur was hot, feverish. The sedative still ran through her system. But she was breathing. Conscious. Alive. "You're okay," he whispered, adjusting her weight across his back. "You're gonna be okay." A shout rang out. One of the guards had spotted him. Kael turned, rifle raised. "Too late," he muttered, and opened fire. The pulse rifle barked twice. The first shot slammed into the Saurian's torso, knocking him back into a support beam. The second hit just above the knee, folding him with a scream of rage. But Kael wasn't waiting to confirm the kill. He pivoted, adjusted Sera across his back, her weight manageable but awkward, and sprinted toward the edge of the canyon. The path he'd scoped earlier led through a narrow defile in the rocks. If he could reach it before the rest of the patrol. Blaster fire scorched the ground behind him. Two more Saurians emerged from the loading ramp, hissing war cries, their weapons glowing with overcharged plasma. Kael dove behind a boulder, the impact rattling Sera in his grip. "Still with me?" he asked, panting. A faint purr vibrated against his back. It was answer enough. He tapped his earpiece. "Kit status?" The cub's voice crackled through, urgent but controlled. "Engines ruined. Locked all hatches. One more thing." Suddenly, the ship's external lights flared bright. Then shorted. Followed by a shrieking alarm, the ship's coolant system. "What the hell did you do?" Kit answered with the innocent smugness only a Vulpine cub could manage. "Rerouted pressure vents. If they start engines now, boom!" Kael grinned. "Remind me to teach you demolition." He bolted from cover, angling toward the rise. Blasts carved the sand around him. He ducked, twisted, returned fire, dropping another Saurian with a bolt to the faceplate. The remaining hunter shouted something guttural and fell back to regroup. Kael reached the ridge just as Kit appeared, peeking from beneath the hull. "Time to go!" Kael called, still moving. Kit scrambled after him. Behind them, the Saurian ship belched smoke from its cooling vents. Sparks danced along its hull. Furious shouts echoed from inside, followed by the grinding sound of a jammed hatch. They wouldn't fly anytime soon. But they'd chase. Kael hit the ignition on the speeder, Kit jumped in first. Kael followed, still carrying Sera across his lap, her arms slung weakly around his neck. "Hold on," he said, and floored it. The speeder roared across the canyon floor, kicking up dust and leaving the hunters behind. They didn't stop moving until the ridge disappeared behind a curtain of night. They didn't speak much on the ride back. Sera drifted in and out of consciousness, her head resting against Kael's shoulder, her body purring faintly, whether from pain, comfort, or instinct, he couldn't tell. Kit sat curled beside them, clutching a heat blanket Kael had tossed over his small shoulders, his expression unreadable in the starlight. By the time they reached the station, the second moon had risen, painting the cliffs in icy silver. Kael pulled the speeder into the garage bay and killed the engine, the sudden silence ringing in his ears. "We're home," he murmured. Kit leapt out first and rushed ahead to open the main hatch. Kael followed, carefully carrying Sera inside. She stirred again, whispering his name. "Kael." "Easy," he said, laying her gently on the bed in the small med bay. "You're safe now." She blinked slowly, pupils adjusting to the lights. Her breathing was shallow, but steady. He began scanning her vitals with a handheld unit, pulse elevated, body temperature high, but manageable. The sedatives were still in her system. He prepped an autosyringe and injected a mild stimulant near the base of her neck. "Should help flush your system. Let your body do the rest." Her eyes tracked him, ears twitching faintly. "Pain? Only my pride," she rasped, then gave the barest flicker of a smile. Kael almost laughed. "That still works? I just watched you get stuffed in a cage and threatened with slavery." Sera's gaze softened. "And I just watched you come for me." A beat passed between them. He looked away, checking her vitals again, more for something to do than anything useful. "I wasn't going to leave you." "I know." She reached up with trembling fingers and lightly touched his jaw. The sensation was electric. Kael froze, caught in her gaze. "We have a saying," she murmured, her voice now clearer. "Among the Felrin. When one risks their life to save another, their spirits become woven. Bound. Not by blood, but by choice." Kael swallowed. "And what does that mean, for us?" "It means," Sera whispered, "I'm yours. If you want me to be." Kael's breath caught. Kit's voice chirped from the doorway, awkward and unsure. "Mother, okay?" Kael turned. "She's going to be fine. Thanks to you?" Kit beamed. His tail swayed with pride. "I'll take first watch," the cub said, dragging over a stool and curling up against the console. Kael looked back to Sera, still watching him with those impossible amber eyes. "You rest," he said, brushing a strand of orange fur from her cheek. "I will," she replied. "But stay. Just sit with me." Kael sat. Her fingers found his. And together, beneath artificial lights and silent moons beyond the station walls, a wounded warrior and a half-sedated Vulpine began to fall into something neither of them had expected. Peace. 3 days passed. Sera recovered faster than Kael anticipated. By the end of the first day, she could sit up unassisted. By the second, she was walking the corridor with a slight limp, her balance slowly returning. By the third, she was outside, standing on the metal platform overlooking the canyon at dawn, her silhouette framed by a sky painted in fire and gold. Kael stood beside her, a mug of bitter coffee in his hand. "You're pushing it," he said gently. "I heal fast," she replied, rolling her shoulders. "My people were bred for endurance. We survived the collapse of 3 moons. We don't stay down long." She wore one of his old field jackets now, tailored hastily to fit. Her fur peeked out from the collar, glowing orange in the sunlight. Kael found himself glancing at her more often than he'd meant to. Something had shifted between them, softened. And deepened. Kit had barely left her side the first day. But now he spent his time exploring the outer perimeter, asking Kael endless questions about sensors, turrets, drones. The cub was sharp. Curious. And Kael found himself enjoying the questions. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. You really built this place yourself? Sera asked, watching the automated irrigation sprayers kick into gear over the greenhouse dome. Kael nodded. Didn't want company. Her tail flicked. How's that working out? He gave a soft laugh. Less quiet than I planned. She turned to him. Better quiet, or better alive? Kael met her gaze. Alive, he said. But I didn't realize that until you knocked on my door. Sera's ears twitched, a smile ghosting across her lips. I didn't knock. Kit did. Semantics. They stood in silence for a moment. The wind rolled across the cliffs. Somewhere below, a winged predator gave a lonely cry. Sera's tone turned more serious. They'll come again. I know. They don't forgive embarrassment. You crippled their ship. Killed 4 of their hunters. They started it. They'll send more. Kael nodded. Then we prepare. He turned, heading back toward the station. We've got time. Let's make it count. Sera watched him go, her arms folded. Something in her chest fluttered. This man, this quiet, haunted man, had saved her. Risked everything. And without saying it, he'd started building something with her. Not just a shelter. A life. Kael stood before the holographic schematic of his station, now fully lit and rotating slowly. The main perimeter sensors were live. The defense turrets were recalibrated and armed with fusion rounds salvaged from old combat kits. The roof panels had been reinforced with shock plating. And he just finished laying the last of the pressure mines out along the northern pass. Still not enough. He knew that. Sera knew it too. They'll bring better this time, she said from behind him. She was crouched beside Kit, who was gently reprogramming an old targeting drone. Vex men don't make the same mistake twice. Kael nodded, not looking up. Then we make them regret coming a second time. He marked another fallback line into the schematic, position Theta. The last stand zone. It ended in the greenhouse. Sera stood, dusting her hands. How long do we have? Kael looked up at the sky through the station's main viewport. The second moon was rising unusually fast. 2 days. 3 if they're slow. Kit's tail twitched. I've reinforced the energy grid. It won't overload now, even under sustained fire. Kael gave the cub an approving look. You sure you're not 20 years old and faking the rest? Kit gave a smug little trill. The work didn't stop. Every hour counted. Kael taught Kit how to prime flash canisters and manually cycle the power shutters. Sera spent the afternoon hunting in the cliffs, returning with preserved roots and a sleek horned creature Kael didn't recognize. She gutted it clean in minutes, her claws deft and practiced. You don't talk much about your people, Kael said that evening as they sat under the stars, sharing a makeshift dinner. Sera hesitated. Not much left to talk about. He waited. They called us the Felrin. Once we were many. Hundreds of worlds. Strong. Proud. But when the collectors came, no one came to help. The others sold us. Or looked away. Her gaze was distant. Her voice steady. Kit was born on the run. I haven't seen another of our kind in 4 years. Kael reached over, placed a hand gently over hers. You're not alone anymore. Sera looked down at their joined hands. Then up at him. No, she said softly. I'm not. The next morning, Kael awoke to a blinking red icon on his console. Long-range scanner, incoming vessel. Unregistered signature. Fast approach vector. He bolted upright and keyed the sensor feed. A ship was descending from high orbit. Not a transport. Bigger. Sleek. Heavy engine load. He magnified the telemetry. Saurian. Sera entered seconds later, already alert. She didn't ask, she read it on his face. How many? Too far to scan internals. But it's not a scouting craft. It's a predator. Kael snapped on the comms channel. Kit, initiate lockdown protocol. Level 4. The cub's voice replied instantly. confirmed. Sera leaned over the console, eyes narrowing at the spinning display. That's not just a hunter vessel. That's a royal carrier. Lord Vex himself may be aboard. Kael's jaw clenched. He came in person? She nodded grimly. He doesn't tolerate humiliation. And we burned his men. Crippled his ship. Took what he thinks he owns. Kael adjusted the scanning filter, rerouting power to the signal dish. The carrier's identity crystal blinked through the interference. Confirmed. Registry, the inevitable. Owner Vexteros. Sera hissed through her teeth. That name. I prayed I'd never hear it again. Kael turned to her. You've met him? She looked away. Not face to face. But I've seen what he does. His collection isn't for science. Or legacy. It's pleasure. Control. He thinks owning rare beings proves his supremacy. He decorates cages with broken families. Kael stood silent for a long time. Then, no one gets taken from here again. He opened a weapons crate, removed a pulse cannon core, and slammed it into a receiver. We fight. Sera nodded once. No hesitation. No escape, she said. We end it. That afternoon, they laid trip mines along the cliffs. Kit rewired the old atmospheric venting system to flood the entrance tunnel with plasma smoke. Kael set up sniper nests with line of sight to both entry points. Sera trained with his rifle, adapted quickly, her natural instincts uncanny. As the second sun began to set, casting long shadows over the metal deck, Kael stood beside her on the outer walkway, wind pulling gently at his collar. This may be the last quiet moment we get, he said. Sera didn't answer. She stepped close, then pressed her forehead to his. I don't want to waste it. The stars were swallowed by clouds by the time the first alert sounded. Perimeter sensors tripped. Kit announced over the intercom, his voice high and tight. West Ridge. Multiple heat signatures. Kael bolted to the defense station. The display lit up with red dots, at least 20 moving in formation, using terrain cover. They're disciplined, he muttered. Not raiders. Soldiers. Sera joined him, slipping her combat vest over her chest, strapping the old pulse rifle across her back like she'd worn it her whole life. Vex brought his elites. Kael keyed the auto turrets. Let's see how elite they are after a few mines. The station lights dimmed as he routed power to the external defenses. Outside, in the moonless dark, the ridge looked calm. Then a thundercrack of fire bloomed across the west slope. Boom! One of the mines ignited, tossing bodies through the air. Then another. Then two more in sequence. Saurian voices barked through the comm scanner, angry, urgent. A formation was down, but the rest kept moving. They're regrouping, Sera said. Spreading out? Exactly what I wanted. Kael replied, grabbing a secondary control stick and manually aligning the ceiling-mounted turret. Through the scope, he watched a group of 5 Saurians move toward the loading bay, scanning with shoulder lights. Too cocky. Kael squeezed the trigger. A fusion round shot down from the roof, striking the ground near their feet and vaporizing 3 in a plume of ash and heat. The other 2 scattered, but one ran into a flash trap and went down screaming. 5 less to worry about, Kael said, voice cold now. Focused. Kit's voice chimed in. 2 more approaching North Drain Tunnel. Fast. Kael's eyes widened. They found the blind spot. I'll intercept, Sera said immediately. She grabbed a sidearm and bolted for the sublevel access. Her speed was astonishing. Even injured, she moved like a phantom. Kael tracked her on the internal cams. She reached the tunnel entrance seconds before the first Saurian climbed through. She didn't hesitate. The first shot dropped the intruder instantly. The second landed between the eyes of the next. Kael saw her pause, breathing heavily. A slow purr vibrated through the mic line. Tunnel sealed, she said calmly. You were right. They underestimated us. They always do. More red dots lit the screen. They're coming in force now, Kael muttered. Sera returned, her body glowing with heat and adrenaline. She stood beside Kael, her presence like fire at his side. "We hold here," she said. "No matter the cost." Kael nodded, rifle in hand. "Then let them come." The silence before the assault was unnerving. No more mines. No more scattered patrols. Just a deep, unbroken tension in the air, like the desert itself was holding its breath. Kael knelt behind the sandbag barricade in the central corridor, eyes fixed on the east entrance. The reinforced blast doors were sealed, but they wouldn't hold. Not against Saurian breachers. Sera crouched across from him, pulse rifle cradled in her arms. Her fur shimmered in the emergency lighting, her expression unreadable. The only sound was the faint hum of the station's failing ventilation system, and Kit's quiet breathing from his hidden compartment. "Ready?" Kael asked. Sera turned her head, vertical pupils narrowing. "I've been ready my whole life." The moment cracked with a sharp blast. The east doors exploded inward in a spray of metal and plasma. Smoke poured through the gap, lit by the blinking emergency lights. Figures emerged, hulking, scaled, armored in black. No shouts. No chaos. Just cold, military precision. Kael opened fire first. His first volley caught the lead invader square in the chest, knocking him into the wall. Sera followed with surgical precision, 2 shots, 2 kills. Her movements were fluid, vicious. Her growl under each breath was almost elegant. The invaders pressed forward, advancing behind thermal shields. Kael slammed the side trigger, activating the corridor's static burst traps. Arcs of blue energy leapt from the walls, frying circuits and forcing the Saurians to halt. One twitched violently, dropped his rifle, and collapsed smoking. "Fall back!" Kael shouted. "Next position!" They moved as one, Kael backing through the corridor, Sera covering him. They passed through the second fallback door, sealed it, and reinforced the latch with a magnetic weld. Another explosion rocked the station. "Rear exhaust ducts breach." Kit's voice came through the comm, high with alarm. 2 more entered from above. Kael swore and turned toward the service corridor, but Sera was already gone. She reached the breach point just in time to meet the intruders. With a low, guttural cry, she sprang, claws bared, teeth flashing. Kael glimpsed the fight through a wall cam. Sera lunged like a predator, striking with terrifying grace. One Saurian fell instantly, throat shredded. The other managed a wild swing with a plasma axe, but she ducked under it and drove her sidearm up through his ribs. Clean. Brutal. Effective. She returned minutes later, streaked with blood, eyes blazing. "They're probing us," she said. "Finding our weak spots. Let's make sure we don't have any." Outside, the sound of heavy thrusters began to shake the ground. Kael looked at the tactical display. A dropship was descending. "Here comes the main force," he muttered. He reached into a hidden compartment and pulled out the last of his thermite charges. "We're not letting them take this place." Sera stepped up beside him. "Or us." Their eyes met, locked. No more words were needed. Together, they turned to face the storm. The dropship landed like a thunderclap, blowing sand across the outer cameras, shaking the station's frame down to its bones. The tactical scanner lit up with over a dozen new heat signatures, heavier than the previous wave. Kael squinted at the readout. "Power armor." Sera's ears flattened. "Vex is done playing." "Good," Kael growled. "So are we." He bolted down the access tunnel, grabbing a duffel loaded with thermite charges. Sera followed close behind, claws clicking softly against the metal floor. "We hit them hard," Kael said. "Choke points. Exits. Make them bleed before they reach the command center." "We won't hold them forever," Sera said. Her voice was calm, but edged with fire. "We don't have to," Kael replied, strapping the detonators to the support beams along the secondary hallway. "We just have to make them regret coming." A voice cut through the calm channel, low, cold, and reptilian. "Terran. Felrin. You are trespassing on property of Lord Vex Daras." Kael froze. That's him, Sera whispered, her body tense. I offer you a choice, Vex continued. Open your doors. Return the specimen. Surrender. And I will make your death quick. Kael leaned into the calm. You talk too much. He clicked off the channel. Outside, the heavy stomps of the advancing troops grew louder. Kael turned to Sera. Take position by the north hall. Use the wall cutout I showed you. It's narrow, perfect for a crossfire. And you? Kael smirked. I've got a date with their forward line. Sera didn't argue. But as she turned, she touched his arm. Don't be reckless. He paused. Then placed his hand over hers. I'm not fighting to die, Sera. She nodded. I'm fighting to protect something. Then she was gone, vanishing into the darkness like smoke. Kael took a deep breath and ran to the forward barricade, turrets armed, rifle ready. The hallway lit up with red warning strobes. Then he saw them. The first wave. 8 power-armored Saurians, each as tall as 2 men, their armor lined with violet plating, their visors glowing like furnace eyes. Kael whispered under his breath. Showtime. The lead invader fired a plasma bolt. And Kael detonated the thermite. The hallway exploded in flame. Shrieks. Screams. Metal warping. 3 of them vanished in the blast. The rest stumbled blinded. Kael rolled from cover, opened fire, and cut down 2 more. The others retreated under suppressing fire. He exhaled, chest heaving, pulse racing. Still alive. But they weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. Smoke filled the station's north wing, thick with the stench of burned wiring and scorched saurian flesh. Kael coughed behind his breather mask, rifle hot in his grip. The power-armored invaders were pulling back, but only momentarily. He knew what came next. The calm before Vex stepped in. He activated the side channel to Sera. Status? North corridor holding, she replied. Her voice was calm, measured. Kit is still hidden. I double-locked the hatch myself. Kael's gut loosened a bit. Good. We need to hold a little longer. A new signal pinged on the scanner. Kael frowned. Unknown entity, just entered atmosphere. Then it shifted. Became 2. Then 3. Kael's eyes widened. Multiple ships. Not Saurian. Sera's voice snapped through the calm. What is it? Before he could answer, a second, stronger signal overtook the others. Clean Terran code. Military encryption. Then a voice, clipped, confident, unmistakably human. Lieutenant Kael Rourke, this is Commander Ilson Vale of the TDF Eclipse. We have entered orbit and are engaging hostile vessels. Hold position. Reinforcements inbound. Kael blinked. What the hell? Sera cut in. They found us? No, Kael whispered. They found Vex. Outside, the ground rumbled thunder from above. Kael raced to the viewport and saw it, a massive Terran cruiser breaking cloud cover, flanked by 2 escort fighters. Its cannons flared, lighting up the ridge. Saurian ships scattered. The inevitable turned to flee. Kael could almost hear the reptilian fury from inside. Coward! He spat. The corridor behind him exploded, blast doors ripped open by force. Kael turned and found himself face to face with something new. Not a soldier. Not a drone. Vex himself. 10 feet tall, draped in black-scaled robes lined with gold, his reptilian frame exuded menace. His eyes glowed like coals, vertical slits fixed directly on Kael. At his hip, a ceremonial blade, ancient and humming with static energy. Kael raised his rifle. Vex spoke first, his voice low and deliberate. You are an insect. Kael fired. The bolt sparked harmlessly off an invisible shield. Vex raised one clawed hand and sent a concussive wave that threw Kael across the corridor. He slammed into the wall, gasping. Vex stalked forward. Give me the Felrin, and I will grant you the dignity of vaporization. Kael wiped blood from his lip, pulled a combat knife from his belt, and stood. You want her? He raised the blade. Come and take her. Vex moved like a phantom of war, his strides slow, deliberate, full of the unbearable confidence of something that had never tasted defeat. The ground beneath his clawed feet sizzled with the low hum of his kinetic shield. His blade hissed as it activated, curving with a dull blue glow. Kael shifted his stance, rolling the combat knife in his grip. He couldn't win this fight. Not conventionally. But maybe he didn't need to. Vex lunged first, unnaturally fast for his size. Kael barely dodged, feeling the crackle of plasma as the blade tore through the air beside his ribs. He pivoted, slashed upward, but the blade struck Vex's shielding and skittered off harmlessly. A clawed backhand caught Kael in the ribs and flung him into the calm station. Sparks exploded around him as the console died. You protect her, Vex snarled. You think she is yours. But she was bred to kneel. Kael coughed blood. Funny, she never mentioned you. Vex roared and brought the blade down. But Kael rolled at the last second, yanking a flash charge from his belt and slamming it into the floor. A pulse of blinding light filled the corridor. Vex shrieked. Kael was already moving, charging forward, slamming his shoulder into the Saurian's side. The kinetic shield held, barely, but it was enough to stagger the giant back a step. Vex swung wildly. The blade grazed Kael's thigh, burning, shallow, but deep enough to stagger him. He fell back, gripping his leg, breath ragged. Vex stalked toward him again. Weak. Soft. Like all your kind. A blur of orange slammed into Vex's side. Sera. She drove both feet into the reptile's ribs, forcing him off balance. Before he could recover, she rolled, grabbed Kael's drop knife, and drove it, two-handed, into the weak joint between Vex's armored collar and chest. He shrieked again, blood hissing as it sprayed across the wall. You want someone to kneel? Sera growled, face inches from his. Try begging. Vex staggered, grabbing her throat. But Kael was back on his feet. He pulled the pulse pistol from his belt, point blank, and fired directly into Vex's jaw. Once. Twice. A third time. The shielding gave out with a crack like thunder. Vex crashed backward, heavy, convulsing, smoke pouring from his mouth. Sera collapsed beside Kael, gasping for air. He caught her. Held her. Are you? I'm fine, she rasped. You. He looked at the blood staining his leg, then back at her face. You came for me. You started it. They both smiled, shaking, breathless, but alive. Behind them, the cruiser's spotlight beams broke through the station's ceiling, and Terran voices flooded the halls. Reinforcements. It was over. The next hours blurred into controlled chaos. Terran medics swept through the station, checking vitals, patching wounds, stabilizing systems. Saurian corpses were collected, catalogued, and incinerated under strict quarantine. The wreck of Vex's body was sealed inside a stasis chamber, his blade confiscated by military intelligence. Kael sat on the station's rear deck, his thigh bandaged, a thermal blanket draped over his shoulders. The sun was rising. The desert stretched before him, washed in amber and violet light. Sera sat beside him. She had a split lip, bruises around her throat, a cracked rib, but her eyes burned with triumph. Kit was curled against her, fast asleep beneath her arm, his tail twitching slightly as he dreamed. Kael looked out across the sand, voice hoarse. I thought they'd take everything from me. They almost did, Sera said. But you stopped them. No, he said, looking down at Kit. We did. A shadow fell across them. Commander Ilson Vale, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, his Terran uniform crisp despite the desert heat, approached with 2 Marines in tow. Lieutenant Rourke, he said. Kael raised a brow. Haven't been called that in a long time. Well, your stunt made it onto every diplomatic channel in 3 systems. The Draconian Court is already denying Vex affiliation, and the Galactic Council is calling for a formal inquiry. Good. Vale nodded towards Sera and Kit. These 2 are now registered as protected citizens under Terran jurisdiction. That makes your station a sanctuary? Kael blinked. A what? You've got history with this region. You're respected. The Council wants to use your outpost as a symbol, a protectorate for endangered species, under Terran banner. Voluntary. Sera's ears perked. You're offering us safety? Vale looked at her with something close to respect. No. We're offering you sovereignty. You're not specimens. You're citizens. Sera's hand found Kael's. He looked at Vale. And if we say no? You won't. You built something here worth keeping. Kael turned to Sera. She looked at Kit. Then back at him. I'm done running, she whispered. Let's build something that can't be burned. Kael nodded slowly. Then looked up at Vale. We accept. That night, as the cruisers departed and the last of the soldiers vanished into the stars, the station stood quiet again, changed but whole. Kael sat on the roof with Sera beside him and Kit curled in her lap. He looked out at the desert. His desert. And smiled. 6 months had passed since the last shot was fired. Ash Vale was no longer a border outpost, it was a living promise. Once surrounded by silence and gunmetal, now the air echoed with soft voices, shared meals, and the rhythmic hum of solar fields powering a new kind of life. Kael walked the northern trail, where the dry ridge curved above the canyon. Below, the children ran wild, barefoot in the red sand, chasing shadows and laughter. Kit led the pack, tail whipping like a banner, ears perked, shouting in a tangled mess of Felran chirps and Terran slang. No drills, no orders. Just joy. From the calm tower, Sera's voice crackled. Dust on the eastern scan. Could be the Yadari scouts. Kael tapped his comm. Send the drones. They're already in the air, she replied. We're a step ahead now. He smiled. She always was. Inside the main compound, walls once lined with weapons now held drawings, photos, and pieces of cloth, each representing someone who had arrived with nothing and stayed to build something. The command center was now a library. The armory a greenhouse. Sera met him at the entrance to the quarters, wiping dirt off her gloves, her fur shimmering with pollen. She looked tired but peaceful, and she had that spark in her eyes. I was about to come find you, she said. Kael tilted his head. Something wrong? No. Something right. She took his hand and placed it gently over her abdomen. Kael felt her warmth, and the tiniest shift beneath. His breath caught. You're. She nodded slowly. A pulse of stillness filled his chest. Not fear. Not even shock. Just awe. I'm not ready, he whispered. No one ever is, she said, leaning into him. But we're not alone anymore. That evening, they didn't say much to the others. But the meal was louder than usual, the fire brighter, the laughter deeper. Kit gave a toast he clearly made up on the spot, and Sera didn't even stop him when he cussed twice. As stars blinked overhead and children fell asleep beside the embers, Kael wrapped his arm around her waist and whispered, The pact we made. She nodded. It still holds. And in that moment it felt like it always would. Not just in population, but in rhythm. Routines. Rituals. It pulsed like something organic now, a heartbeat in the middle of nowhere. The desert no longer swallowed sound, it cradled it. Children's laughter echoed through the solar fields. Wind chimes danced across rooftops. And somewhere in the garden dome, a half-built cradle sat waiting in the corner. Kael walked the main corridor at dawn, nodding to early risers preparing meals, tightening solar bolts, tuning weather sensors. Every day brought something new. A new face. A new story. A new scar to listen to, and a new reason to stay. Sera was slower now. Her body had entered that still, watchful phase of pregnancy where everything narrowed, breathing, thought, movement. She paced less and nested more. Kit had taken up most of her patrols. He was growing into something solid. Not a soldier. Not quite. But something strong enough to stand. That morning, the Western Ridge scanner caught movement. Not local. A ship. Unregistered. Small. Fast. Kael stiffened. It wasn't a refugee vessel. He notified Sera. Kit suited up without being asked. The ship didn't descend immediately. It hovered for minutes. Watching. Testing. Then it landed on the far perimeter, far from the main gates, far from the welcome banners and murals and laughter. Kael, Kit, and 2 volunteers approached cautiously. The hatch opened. And out stepped a woman in a black flight jacket, hands raised, eyes scanning. "Don't shoot," she said. "I came because I heard something impossible." Kael lowered his weapon slightly. "And what did you hear?" The woman exhaled. "That there's a place out here that doesn't care who you were, only who you're trying to become." Behind him, Kit spoke quietly. "She's alone. And scared." Kael nodded, then extended his hand. "Welcome to Ash Vale." 1 week after the stranger arrived, she asked Kael a quiet question over tea by the East Tower. "Why do they listen to you?" Kael stirred his cup. "Because I listened first." She considered that, then just nodded. That was the last time she asked about the past. Like the others, she began to plant roots. Her jacket was hung beside the others. Her name joined the roster of helpers. Ash Vale didn't demand apologies. Just effort. And over time, it was enough. Sera gave birth at dawn, when the desert sky was still violet and the moons hadn't yet faded. Kit waited outside the medical dome, tail stiff with nerves, eyes locked on the entry flap like it was holding back an entire storm. Kael came out pale, trembling, blood on his sleeves. He was smiling. "She's perfect," he whispered. "They're both okay." Kit exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. Then, wordlessly, he bolted into the dome, overcome. The sun rose slowly that morning, a golden wave spilling over Ashvale's rooftops. And somewhere deep inside the sanctuary, a newborn cried. A new voice. A new beginning. Later that night, Kael stood alone at the outer wall. The desert stretched out before him, still vast, still dangerous. But different now. No longer a barrier. A line. A quiet declaration carved into dust. Behind that line was something fragile, but fiercely defended. He reached into his coat, pulled out a piece of old cloth, the same one he had worn the day Sera and Kit first arrived. He tied it to the antenna post beside him. Not a flag. A memory. A vow. Behind him, Sera stepped out, baby in arms. Kit followed. And others, dozens of them, gathering, quietly watching the stars. Kael looked at them. Then at the horizon. "No one crosses this place in hate," he said, voice steady. "Not ever again." And they stood together, the broken, the rebuilt, the new, not as survivors of war, but as architects of peace. Ash Vale had become more than a sanctuary. It was a promise kept. Forever.